Alright, welcome to the channel for some medium-sized fixed blade content today. If you've been following my channel, you know that I recently made a move to a new place that has a big old forested backyard, and that move, along with some other things that happened in my life, spread my budget pretty thin. So at least for now, tools that are useful to all the new tasks I have at hand and are also affordable, yeah, those are the ones that are most appealing. Though I have had my eye on one of these knives for a long time. I just never pulled the trigger. Didn't know what kind of use I could make out of it. You know, would it be worth adding to the collection? But at this point in my life, I'm thinking an affordable, light, Scandi ground blade might indeed come in handy. So I went ahead and spent the money on the cold steel Peacemaker 2. And spoiler alert, I liked it so much I almost immediately got the smaller Peacemaker 3. Now, there are a lot of reviews on YouTube of both of these knives, positive and negative and mixed. Hopefully I can put my own unique spin on it, make this worth your time. And I will refer to some of those reviews as well as Cold Steel's own presentation of this knife to the market, the naming and the ad copy. Yeah, they're really kind of pushing this forward as a self-defense martial tool. But what I'm seeing is a lot of potential utility usefulness on a budget. But if you've been following the channel, you all know I like a knife that has a good balance of both utility and martial. So let's take a look at them. First up, we have got to talk about these sheaths. Pretty much every review I've seen has universally agreed it's the worst feature of these knives. And I also agree. I hate what they did here. I have no idea what they were thinking, especially if they were going for martial, not utility. But what they say they were thinking is martial, something light and slim, easily concealable in a boot. They actually call these boot knives, pocket, waistband. They also say that the material is the same material as their Secure-X sheaths, like that's somehow a good thing. If you're familiar with their Secure-X sheaths, they're made out of a fiberglass reinforced nylon that's notoriously hard on the edges of knives as they rub against that material being drawn and resheathed. But this actually gets worse because of a couple of design choices, especially if they're going in the martial direction, not the utility direction. Okay, let's look at it from the side, and we will certainly talk about this bizarre retention system in a second. But slim blade, if they're going for concealability, I think they'd want a slimmer profile. What you've got here does have some taper to it, but it's a big chunky thing that's basically the same thickness as the grip of the knife. And because of that, you've got a very slim blade floating free inside, well, what's basically a big rectangle of whatever this material is. Now, it does feel softer than some of the fiberglass reinforced materials, so I'm hoping it's not, and so far it hasn't chewed up the edge. But not only am I getting drag drawing it in and out, but it's floating side to side, and yes, because there's no real easy way to align it, sometimes I'm actually snagging and cutting into the side of the material. So yeah, none of that's good, but it actually gets worse. Let's talk about the retention system. All right, why did they go with these big long flaps? We will take a look at my experiences with carry and deployment, but I think what they were going for is if this is inserted down in a boot or a pocket or a waistband, they might be looking for something to help you clear what's a very kind of grippy craton handle. But it's actually working against you in a couple of different ways. Retention is created by a couple of square cuts at the base of both of these flaps, which with a little bit of break-in, yeah, you see I just snagged myself putting it back in there, so it's cutting into its own sheath. Grabs a hold of that with no pressure at all on either one of these flaps. Retention is positive. It's not going anywhere, but release is also positive. But if anything puts any pressure on one or both of these, which is going to happen if it's in a boot, waistband, or down in your pocket, or, yeah, when you just go to grab the thing. And, yeah, grabbing the thing is its own issue because, yeah, these flaps cover about 2/3 of the grip. So when I go to grab the thing, I'm just catching it with my bottom fingers and drawing it. And in doing so, I really can't avoid touching these. any downward pressure on these flaps locks that down so hard that, yeah, that's not going anywhere. And if this is a Marshall tool that you might need to access and deploy in a hurry, all right, I think they tried to compensate for this problem by making the clip, well, insane. Now, I didn't call it a belt clip because this is too small and slim to fit on any of my belts. Maybe a clip on a waistband or a pocket. We'll take a look at that, but none of my boots at the top are this slim, so that doesn't work for me. But the retention on it, yeah, it's nuts. It's really hard to get it clipped on anything. It's a fight, which you would think would mean it's got really good retention, right? No, it's certainly not enough to overcome any resistance I'm getting from, well, the additional lockup of any accidental pressure on these feed lips. So most of the time when I go to draw the thing, I'm not drawing the blade, I'm drawing the whole thing. So as a Marshall tool for me, that ain't working. Quick addendum before we move on, because yes, I'm having trouble letting this go. I feel like the design team is punking me here. Look at that. That reminds me of what I would see on a remote control or something else with a battery compartment, which would suggest where I'm supposed to press or push against to open the thing. But that is in no way functional or even really reachable. And if I press down on it to try to get leverage, yeah, it does lock it down even harder. Speaking of which, if I press down against the top of it, I'm having to grip the base of the knife with maybe 1 or 2 fingers to do that, and doing so presses it against the other flap and locks it in harder. Prying one up locks it in harder. The only easy way I found to release the thing is to actually get my fingers under both flaps, pry them both simultaneously, and then I got a nice release. But how am I going to do that if it's down in a pocket or a boot or a waistband? Before I bore you with the stats, I have to admit that when I decided to buy the 3, I expected for whatever reason it would simply be a shortened version of the 2. But looking at them here side by side, you can see that, yeah, it's scaled down in pretty much every dimension except one, and we'll get to that. But we'll start at the friendly end, and the friendly end is one of the things that really sold me on this knife. Spoiler alert, it feels great, and we'll talk about that more in use and handling. But even though it's kind of squarish, it's got some nice palm swell and taper to it. It's very grippy, and the tang goes all the way down to the bottom of the handle. It's full length, and you can see it inside the lanyard hole, and yes, I confirmed it with my magnets that it is steel all the way through. So that's nice. But dimensions of the 2 different grips, I'm actually using 2 measurements for length. One is the total length, and the other one, what I'm going to consider usable grip length, kind of between these 2 points. So on the larger 2, full length 5 inches, usable length 4 inches. So 12.5 centimeters versus 10 centimeters. And yeah, I'm looking down at my notes to give you the metric as well as the imperial. Now, when you go to the number 3, it's scaling down to 4.5 inches, or inside here 3.5, so 11.5 centimeters or 8.5 centimeters. Now width, front to back, it's reasonably straight. There's a little bit of swell to it. On the number 2, that is 1 1/16 of an inch, or 2.8 centimeters. And on the 3, it's coming down to 7/8 of an inch, about 2.3 centimeters. So it is significantly slimmer that way. But interestingly enough, thickness of grip. Now there is, again, a bit of a taper and swell here. But measuring the middle of the grip, they're both 9/16 of an inch, 1.4 centimeters. Before we get into the blades, let's talk about value for the money. Shop around, but speaking of affordability, I picked up the big one on Amazon. I'll put the links down in the description for about $27 US, and the small one for around 25. Now there are a lot of options I found in that price range that you're probably going to see in future episodes, and some possibly cheaper. One reviewer specifically recommended, if you're looking for a 4-inch Scandi ground utility knife that's also good for bushcraft, maybe go with the Mora Companion. And that's good advice, and we'll certainly get back to it. But looking at these, okay, how did they make them so cheaply, especially considering it's steel all the way down? They went with a 4116. Now, I have seen older reviews that complained that the steel was pretty soft. It didn't hold an edge well at all. So far, I'm not having that problem, and my test files are saying it's somewhere above 60 HRC. So maybe they made some improvements. Weight of the knives, yes indeed, they are quite light. The bigger one, 5.5 ounces, 156 grams. The smaller one comes down to 3.3 ounces, 94 grams. Now, besides the differences we talked about down in the friendly ends, blades, obviously, big difference in size. The 2 has a 5.5-inch blade, 14 centimeters, whereas the 3 has a 4-inch blade, 10 centimeters. They also differ in terms of width front to back. The bigger one, the blade width, by the way, is pretty much the same as the width of the grip. So again, we're looking at 1 1/16 of an inch, about 2.8 centimeters, and here we're looking at about 7/8 of an inch, about 2.3 centimeters. Now, thickness. One of the things that drew me to these knives was that really interesting kind of scalloped thickness profile that makes them thinner in the front half than the back half. And we'll talk about how that functions and maybe some potential vulnerabilities. I have certainly seen other knives with this profile. Kind of reminds me of something should be eating oysters with or something like that. And yeah, it includes, there's a couple of Mora designs that have this particular blade profile. But how much relief is it actually on these? Not as much as I expected. They are different thicknesses between the 2 and the 3. In the bigger one, that blade thickness goes from 2.75 millimeters down to 2.5 millimeters. Not much of a change at all. It's a little bit of a difference, but not much. It's a little bit more significant for whatever reason, and maybe some inconsistency in manufacture. On the number 3, the thickness is 2.5 millimeters, goes down to about 1.75 in the front half. Now your overall length, 10 1/4 inches, 26 centimeters versus 8 3/8 inches, 21.5 centimeters. Now your point of balances are different. It's interesting, you have more steel in the blade on the 1. So point of balance right kind of in that finger relief there. It's about 3/4 of an inch down. On the smaller one, it's even further down. It's a little bit closer to the bottom of that, about 1 inch away from the base of the blade. Just play a little game at home and see how many times Mike confuses Peacemaker and Peacekeeper, or is it 1 versus 2 versus 3 versus, okay. So the Peacemaker 2 versus the Peacemaker 3, yeah, my brain's getting old, came with really nice Scandi edges. Now, these are not the out-of-the-box edges. So far, I have used them for cutting up packaging, doing some food prep. Yeah, they're really good for that. Also doing a little bit of carving and other utility work in my forest of a yard. These are very thin blades. I would not consider them appropriate for some hard use, but we'll get back to that subject. But let's see how they're doing right now. I have not resharpened, refreshed anything with these. We'll try the 2 on a little bit of paper. Oh yeah, do a little Kyle test here. Pierce through, not the pierciest tip, but yeah, that goes through really nicely. Let's try the number 3, the smaller one. And oh yeah, pretty much same result. Okay, this one has a little gunk on it, so it's snagging a bit. But yeah, it's a really nice tip. Yeah. All right, how about a thicker material? Let's get through some cardboard. Be consistent here. Start with the bigger number 2. Yeah, nice slim blade with a nice keen edge. That just sails through packaging. Number 3, same, yeah. All right, now I did say these are not intended for hard use, but okay, let's go a little harder.
Peacemaker 2. Peacemaker 3. Oh yeah, right into the redwood. Peacemaker 2. No tip damage. Peacemaker 3. Looks all right. Peacemaker 2. Pretty nice. Peacemaker 3. Uh-oh. This is a little task I like to call idle carving. Get these branches in my yard that appeal to me as potential walking sticks. I'm just slowly working at them. It's nice to hang out in the green. And this is a pretty good carving tool. Yeah. Come back the other way. Okay. Let's try the little one. This is after I mangled the edge and refreshed it. I think I may have lost a little bit there, but hey, this is pretty good. Despite the damage. Bark. That's nice. Shave into this dry fur. Alright, Peacemaker 2, nice. Press my thumb up against the back of that yard, even though I can't get my thumb on the back of it very easily. How about the number 3? Alright, shave off the bark easy enough. It's a nice tool. It's after I mangled the edge. But yeah, still going strong. Yeah, I like the leverage I can get on the shorter one a little bit better for tasks like this. All right, now considering how badly that bamboo test is, this made me nervous. I'm not trying to chop the wood, but let's see how it holds up. Reasonable bite for such a light knife. Looks okay, feels okay. For the smaller one, which I did mangle. And surprising bite for such a light knife, and well, I didn't damage it a second time. Probably shouldn't, but let's go ahead and push it a little bit. It's about 3/4 inch of dry ash branch. All right, give a little one to try. Even though the edge has already been damaged. Wow. Looks okay.
Summary of results. Food prep, very useful. Cutting up packaging and cardboard, also very slicey. Now, I do feel a bit limited in certain carving and slicing tasks that I can't really get my thumbs easily on the backs of the spines, but I can press against the back guard. It's not bad. Other knives might be more comfortable for doing these tasks, though. Also found some, as I'm slicing certain kinds of foods and cardboard, interesting edge deflection where it was kind of turning in the cut. Not quite sure what that's about. Maybe I'm not used to the knife. But okay, the harder tests. Well, first up though, stabbing and thrusting first into my Pell, which is multiple layers of thick cardboard backed up by a couple of inches of compressed brown paper bag paper up against my redwood target. Really impressive. I used handshake grip, I used the saber grip, I even flipped it around to a foil grip, and yes, edge towards me North American Bowie style, and in reverse grip. Penetration was awesome, and no damage. Speaking of no damage, I took it that extra step, and I was kind of nervous about this, doing those thrusting and stabbing tests directly into the redwood target, and yeah, they held up just fine. But that didn't quite last in the next test, the bamboo test. Hacking and slashing into a piece of hard bamboo to see if I can intentionally induce chip or roll in a fragile edge, and well, yeah, I did, which is why I do the test. Just in case your knife hits something hard, depending on how you're using it, it's good to know how durable that edge is, and this is a really keen slicey edge. Now, interesting, the bigger one didn't suffer any damage whatsoever, but the smaller one got, well, kind of chewed up. However, most of that came out, refreshing the edge with my handy dandy Work Sharp field sharpener, something I probably should do a review of. Let me know in the comments below if you want to see a review on this. But yeah, I do keep it at hand. All right, post repair. Oh yeah, it's a little tiny nick in the edge. I can feel that snag. But yeah, it wasn't too hard to mostly repair. And in that damaged state, I went ahead and took it to some fine carving tasks. I am, well, idly working on a number of big straight pieces of wood I found in the yard, turn them into walking sticks. So I just go in and do a little work on them from time to time. Fine slicey tools come in handy for that. And these work great. Again, I feel like I would have better function if I could get my thumb on the back of them a bit easier, but yeah, weren't bad at all. Did some wood carving on some fir, and yeah, I figured it was a risk after that disastrous showing on the bamboo test. Chopped it into the fir just to see what would happen, and it had a nice bite. Didn't penetrate very deeply because they're so light, but they didn't take any more damage. And then I figured I'd go ahead and push it to the max and baton through some 3/4 inch dry ash branch, and both of them did just fine. Didn't take any more damage. So yeah, except for that one hiccup with that really keen razor Scandi ground edge on the bamboo test, pretty good. Maybe not the most comfortable grip though for utility work. What about the Marshall? All right, down to the unflattering waistline view to take a look at carry and deployment. And yeah, I'm feeling really limited and awkward here. As I mentioned, those clips don't really fit on any of my belts. And trying to shove them in my boots, well, if I shove them inside the boot, it's kind of chunky. That doesn't really work. If it's on the outside, yeah, it's kind of chunky. Also doesn't really work. And that's assuming I'm wearing a pair of boots that's thin enough at the top to fit this tight, little tiny belt clip. So what I've been doing is one of two things. Clipping them inside the pocket. Now lengthwise, the smaller one just barely fits in my back pocket. The longer one just barely fits in my front pocket. And those clips do have just enough retention that as long as I don't pinch the feed lips, I can just grab a little tiny pinch of the base of the grip and deploy. So that's not the problem there. The problem there comes in trying to reinsert them into my pocket. I gotta kind of do this blind and wiggle it in because, again, this sheath doesn't really direct which way the blade is facing, and this thing is really sharp and kind of fishing in my pants here. Yeah, this is not really very confidence inspiring. It snags if I've got anything else in my pocket. So more often than not, my other default is just dropping the whole thing in my pocket loose and pulling it out, and yeah, and then I have to put that back in my pocket. But at this point, how is this better than, say, a folding knife or just something with a better sheath? Before we talk about Marshall potential, we have to touch on what's become the driving philosophy of the series based on the wise words of Jorge Prina, that the best Marshall knife for you is not only the one that you have on you when you need it, and I hope you never need it for that, but the one that you use the most for the most things. Therefore, well, not only is it more likely to be with you, but you're going to be most comfortable and familiar with it. So that balance of Marshall and utility which also helps with optics, frankly. I do know some knife guys who carry one knife for utility and another one as a self-defense tool, but there are places with people who are sensitive to other people having weapons on them. Some of them might be law enforcement. So having a knife that you can carry and justify it as, no, officer, it's a tool, can be a very good thing. And these, I feel, do have a great balance between martial and utility. In martial application, going to go at this a little bit sideways compared to how I usually do, because when I first picked up the Peacemaker 2, instantly appealed to me in terms of how it felt in hand, and that absolutely included transitions. The shape of that grip with the swell and the flare and the grippiness, it's just a natural for me for pinch flipping, and also narrow enough for me to finger twirl. So manipulation of the knife is awesome. The blade performed very well in stabbing and thrusting, forward grip, reverse grip, edge turn towards me so I can get that cutting action in the stab. The tip held up surprisingly well considering how slim it is. Now, I didn't particularly try to abuse it. Speaking of abuse, I have heard you're not supposed to throw these, but okay, I wouldn't make a habit out of throwing them, but I managed to pull it off with both knives. And they survived. But I also feel like I have enough of an edge and a belly that I can make really good use with both of them in slashing and hewing cuts. But don't feel I have enough mass, especially not in a smaller one, for snap cutting. Maybe with the bigger one. Yeah, just enough that I might be able to do something with a snap cut if I'm aiming for the right spot, or might just make my opponent flinch, create an opening to do something else in a rapid combination. Now, there's nothing much on the back, including much of a tip hooking backwards, to get too much use out of a back cut, but I could kind of do that reverse hooking sort of stabbing action. So that's there. Don't really feel like I've got mass or length, even with the bigger one, to displace or parry another blade. So yeah, my techniques are going to be evasive with the knife, relying on what the rest of me is doing. But in hand, yeah, really fast in terms of its action. Really feels responsive, also very light for carry, and that grip. Yeah, I feel like I have a really good, secure, comfortable grip on it. Guard is certainly substantial enough that I don't feel like my hand is at risk sliding up on it. Let's talk about reverse grip. All right, so edge facing away from me. Stabbing very powerful, stays put, and it's comfortable in the hand under impact, and I feel like I've got good enough belly to slash with in different directions. Now, as I mentioned, in reverse grip for slashing especially, I like a shorter blade because I feel like I have more leverage and more control than I would with a really long one. So this length of blade for me in that grip is very useful, and yeah, I could reverse that blade edge towards me to get more cutting action out of that stabbing arc, but then I don't have anything really happening on the front of the stroke. So there's that. So martially speaking, yeah, I am actually really impressed with it. Now there's no metal or anything hard sticking out the bottom, but there is a bit of a corner there. You might be able to use that for an impact tool. Wouldn't really tend to count on it, but all right. Now, as mentioned, reviewers saying that if you are looking for, especially if we're talking about a 4-inch Scandi ground knife, a really good affordable one for field use, recommended the Mora Companion. And yeah, before I was anywhere near finished making the video, I went ahead and got myself one. So stay tuned for not only a review of this knife, but a side-by-side comparison. Until then, as always, thank you all so much for watching, following my journey, putting up with my madness, liking, subscribing, adding to our conversation in the comments, and I hope to see you back for, well, talk about the Mora Companion.